Hello and welcome to episode 2 of series 1, Flicks Through Time. I am your host as always, TW Norwich. Thank you very much for joining us. I have a quick announcement before we get started. Basically, I just wanted to let you know that the promised behind the scenes, let's say behind a paywall, well that's the scary way of saying it, episodes are going to be starting very, very soon. So those of you on the higher Patreon levels, that's the top 2 tiers, you're going to get a bonus episode every month. It's not an extra so much as the podcast is still going to be free at all times, but basically I've got an episode from our guests where they talk about their own interests, and it's going to be much shorter form, maybe like a 5 to 10 minute thing, and it's just a great way to get to know especially our recurring guests. So that's going to be fun, and that's going to be coming out very soon, so stay tuned for that. Speaking of Patreon, another thank you to Sean for being in the top tier. Really, really pleased with the support so far. I've got a lot of free members on Patreon. That's the thing to remember. You can be on Patreon for free. That will be my preferred place to have this happening for everybody, just because you don't have to deal with all the ads and all the chaos that is YouTube. But it'll keep coming up in YouTube. All my videos that are not behind the paywall, which is most of them, will be coming out usually a week late on YouTube, and that's great. If you're there now, thank you. Like and subscribe, all that sort of business. But basically what I'm looking for is, if ideally my main audience is on Patreon, and there's always going to be a free option. I don't plan on ever changing that. Now, on to the episode. Today we are talking about, well, I've called it genre benders, which is, I don't know if that's a great title, but frankly it's about films that change genres partway through in a very significant way. And to be honest, it was really just an excuse to talk about Sinners, which is a really big deal at the moment. And we do make reference to a previous film and talk about 2 different eras, effectively, of these kinds of films. And I think I'll leave it at that. We've got recurring guest of Nate, who has some wonderful insights and really enhanced the conversation. So really looking forward to you hearing that. So enjoy, and as always, spoilers ahead. Hello, Nate. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
Yes, again.
Yet again.
This, because we're time travelers, this will be completely nonsensical to people listening to this in order, but we've already done an episode for this series, which is unconventional. We weren't planning this episode.
No.
It suddenly jumped in, and pushing the other one back might make it more topical anyway, because without spoiling about that episode, we refer to a film that was not yet released, and maybe by the time the episode comes out, it'll be closer to that film's release.
Everyone's got Tron fever. I can't wait to see that happen.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that'll happen.
Yeah.
But we wanted to talk about something. Why did we want this episode, Nate? What happened?
We both saw the film Sinners, and I loved it. I think it's incredible, and I know you've got thoughts as well. I don't want to tell your secrets.
Yes.
But we did want to talk about it.
Yeah, and the fact that it was slightly topical is, I thought, an interesting kind of experiment, because it should be pretty obvious at this point this show's not designed to be topical.
Yeah, it's backwards facing.
Most definitely. But I thought it kind of interesting that we both had a lot to say, and it just kind of was spewing forth in my brain as I was walking out of the cinema, and I thought, well, why not try something a bit more topical? Because I can, if I pull my finger out, actually. Production on these episodes can be quick,
yeah.
But as a series in general, they are quite slow. But I thought, let's get this out there. And I mean, for context, the film is still here in Australia in cinemas, but I think its theatrical run will be well and truly done by the time this comes out.
It was part of the first wave of American summer releases, our winter releases. It was a couple months ago now.
Yeah, and I think it might even already be on some streaming services in some parts of the world. So, but it probably on streaming by the time this comes out. But so we'll call it semi-topical. But there's 2 types of movie people on the internet. There's the what happened this week in cinema,
the knee-jerk reaction crowd.
Yeah, and that ain't us. So this is a little different.
No, we're considered gentlemen. We take our time and we're very deliberate with our thoughts.
Yes, and both stunningly handsome as well.
Yeah, and dapper and sipping martinis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Only some of those were lies. Now, not just about Sinners. I do want to talk about a film very, very similar in some ways, just so we've got the premise of the show working, I suppose, for face value. But the idea that looking at something similar and comparing across time, which of course is what we generally do. And that film, of course, is From Dusk Till Dawn. Now, Sinners has multiple, shall we say, inspirations, but I think that the thing that was very clear to me as I was watching it is, wow, very From Dusk Till Dawn, some Tarantino connections. And I do believe that Tarantino has been cited as a big inspiration too, more generally, not just because of From Dusk Till Dawn. So if we rewind a little bit to the 90s, just before we get to the main event, we have From Dusk Till Dawn, which was a Tarantino-esque film, or shall we say, connected to him. It is a script by him, directed by long-time collaborator, I suppose you call him, Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah.
And Tarantino is in the film.
Yeah.
I believe he won a Raspberry for poorest performance or worst performance that year for that. He is...
Yeah, first of many bad performances that he's given in films.
He's not a great actor.
No, he's very awkward.
Yeah, which is not his strength, and that's fine. But starring George Clooney, and my experience was I found it late night one time and watched it as like, what the hell is this thing? I'm talking back in the 90s or maybe early 2000s, before there was the internet to sort of share this knowledge. There have been sequels. There was even a TV series From Dusk Till Dawn, so it became a thing. But the story goes, do you know the story of why suddenly vampires turn up halfway? Do you know the behind-the-scenes reason why?
I do not.
There you go. So this was pretty much the first thing I heard about it. It explains perfectly why this happened. Basically, they had this script that had no supernatural elements in it. They got halfway through, needed more money, and the studio basically said, no, unless you can put vampires in it. And they said, okay, I guess
what a coincidence. We were going to do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
So it was either do that or the film's not made. So that's why halfway through the film, suddenly vampires turn up. So that was not part of the original plan.
Yeah.
You end up with some really interesting actors in this film. There was a lot who was in it. But the film came out in, I just want to confirm, 1996. Yes, good. So 1996, this film comes out.
So that's peak Tarantino's first wave of critical acclaim, hey? Because that's a couple of years after Pulp Fiction. Because I think Pulp Fiction's 94, I think.
Well done. Yes, Pulp Fiction. So immediately after this, Jackie Brown comes out. So yeah, no, absolutely. So it was off the back of Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he wasn't directing it, so maybe that wasn't enough to.
And it was probably because he had scripts kicking around in Hollywood for a while before he broke through. Like True Romance is a Tarantino script.
Oh, okay.
And I think directed by Tony Scott, Ridley's brother.
Right.
So he was a screenwriter in the business for a while, and I think once he broke through with Reservoir Dogs and then really broke through with Pulp Fiction, I think his name attached to a project made it a lot more interesting, maybe not necessarily to the extent where you could get away with not having vampires in your From Dusk Till Dawn
especially
script.
Not in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing about... So, okay, when you talk vampires for a moment, and an entire episode of this was dedicated back in the pilot series with Sam Sexton and I, vampires have had this big roller coaster ride. So obviously in the 30s with the first Dracula, big deal.
Mm-hmm.
They bounced back in the 40s. They went quiet for a while. They came back with the Hammer films with Christopher Lee, sort of 60s, 70s. And then they kind of died down. In the 80s, it was the slasher film. Supernatural stuff went away. Serial killers. So the vampires go away. Not entirely, but there are certainly some interesting vampire films in the 80s, but they weren't the...
No, I think vampires in the 80s become younger. They become like the leather trench coat vampire.
Yes.
With Fright Night and Lost Boys.
Yeah, you have Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen and people like that being vampires rather than tall European.
Yeah, they're not they're not the thinly veiled fear of European sexuality anymore. They're a fear of young male sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah, and in some cases, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit of homosexuality references as well.
Yeah, a little bit of that in Lost Boys, a little bit of that.
A little bit of that, subtly.
A sprinkle of that?
Yes. Yeah. Vampires. Why are we suddenly talking about them in the mid-90s? Well, you have Coppola's Dracula, and you also have Interview with the Vampire. So suddenly, put vampires in everything. Now, those were early 90s, And it's still, you're talking 95 of the production of From Dusk Till Dawn. You're still a year or two away from, say, Blade, when it came in, and the idea of there being Marvel movies. No one talked about Marvel movies, but a superhero movie. So yeah, there were things where some superhero movies were kind of happening because of Batman in '89. Vampires was suddenly interesting, but I think it sums up the decade of the '90s. It's like, we don't know what you want, but we'll try some stuff.
Yeah, which it's interesting. Like the two big vampire movies that you mentioned, then from the early '90s, Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, and
rolls right off the tongue.
Oh my god, yeah, so many apostrophes in that time. And Interview with a Vampire. Those are European dandy vampires.
Yeah, they're the old.
Yeah, and From Dusk Till Dawn is almost a precursor to the Blade vampires, where they are just like party vampires.
Yes.
They hang out at bars and they feast on blood. And I don't know. I might be exposing a little bit of vampire cultural ignorance. I don't know whether I'd seen that anywhere else. Like, I know not at this scale at least. But it's what makes the movie so interesting is that it's not a genre mashup so much as it is like those yogurt cups where all the fruit's on top. It's not mashed up. It just switches genre halfway through.
Yeah. So, and that's unusual. Films that break their genre and rebuild it partway through.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a Franz Ferdinand song. It's a little bit, did you mean to do that?
Yeah. Is the record skipping? Or what's going on here? Like, and I think that's because if you set the tone for a piece and then you change tone, it's almost like a broken promise.
And will your audience go with you?
Yeah.
Of course is the question.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that From Dusk Till Dawn is, I do want to move on very quickly to, soon I want to move on to
movie I
Sinners.
Actually find interesting. I don't find Dusk Till Dawn that interesting.
No, but it's interesting as it was an inspiration to Sinners. So you may have heard, as someone who's occasionally dabbled in films, you may have heard of a chap called John Carpenter.
I have, yes. Sorry,
there was a sarcastic pause there.
Oh yes.
The other thing was, so John Carpenter made a film called Vampires, which actually came out a smidge after From Dusk Till Dawn, and it's also got this sort of Western vibe.
Yeah,
but it leans heavily. It's a Western with vampires, and it's like that from the beginning.
That's James Woods.
James Woods as an action star, which obviously you look at James Woods and especially in that era and go, clearly an action star.
I believe him to be like he'd be a good heroin addict. Sure, like he's got the frame, but and the seriousness.
Yes. Yeah. So interesting casting. I love John Carpenter's Vampires. It's John Carpenter fans will generally put that low on the list.
Yeah, I do.
I put it up high, but I know it's not a great film. It's a really enjoyable B movie, and Carpenter's films aren't all B movies. Some of them are, let's say B movies that are aspirational. This is not trying to be anything other than a fun B movie. So with tongue-in-cheek joy, let's just have some fun. I guess I'm just mentioning that as this From Dusk Till Dawn wasn't isolated. That came out, and maybe as a response they said, a Western with vampires? Great, go for it. I mean, that was after he did Escape from LA, but anyway, less said about that, the better.
Yeah.
But so... Again, 90s, kind of weird. Like they were just trying stuff.
Is it kind of a commentary on, like late night culture? Like the nature of a vampire is that they're nocturnal, and movie monsters, I think, are generally, if not their creation, at least their success is a commentary on what the cultural concerns are at the time.
Possibly, and I'd suggest also more broadly, and we won't pick on this thread too much because it would go very deep. But the idea that I generally, with tongue-in-cheek, refer to the 90s being a very boring decade for cinema. Obviously, there's some great films, but I find it, when I'm so fascinated with the 30s, with the advent of sound, with the 70s, with all the stuff we've talked about before, the 90s is relatively dull. And, it was the end of the Cold War, the War on Terror hadn't started yet, and there were less big concerns. So hence, it is a lot of this, try this, I guess. Oh, yeah, vampires, throw that in there. So that's what I think it's a byproduct of. So, Western with vampires by John Carpenter of all people. Sure, why not? Try that.
I mean, the two make sense in the, like, there's crossover between, like, cowboy iconography and vampire iconography, like the church in the middle of a town and all that sort of stuff, the crucifix. There's overlap there. They're not totally silly. And
not completely unprecedented.
Yeah.
And I'll just, I think we will move on now, but I just want to mention very quickly, there was a sequel to Vampires that John Carpenter produced, didn't direct, and it stars Bon Jovi. Yes, that Bon Jovi. It is one of my favorite bad movies of all time.
Can you give me that? Because I'm suspecting it's got a year in the title. Is that the one that... No, is it Vampires of Mars? No, what is that?
No, that's Ghost of Mars.
Ghost of Mars.
Which that's a whole nother conversation.
Okay.
But,
What's the sequel to Vampires?
so that question you asked me only 2 seconds ago, and I definitely remember it, and therefore didn't have to look it up.
Straight off the dome, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Vampires Los Muertos. I'm trying to remember what that means now.
Vampires of Death?
Could be. Anyway, 2002, a few years later, it's a genuine joy to watch. It's from the bad acting to the cheap effects.
Are you telling me Bon Jovi didn't put in a good performance?
I am suggesting that perhaps, yes.
Bad.
There is one scene where I went, that was actually pretty good, and it stands out.
Yeah, right.
Because it's the only scene. I genuinely, unironically recommend watching this film.
Oh, yeah.
The other one, the Vampires one from John Carpenter, is a fun B movie if you go in with the right attitude. There's nothing quality about this film, and therefore it is a joy. So,
okay, all right.
Quick recommendation.
All cheese.
Cheese all the way through. It's great.